Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Ethan and Jenna Show. I am your host, Ethan Micheal, and alongside me is the lovely Jenna Belk. Jenna, how are you?
I'm doing pretty great. How are you, Ethan?
I am doing well. I, of course, didn't get much sleep last night. I got to start making sure I sleep as much as possible on Saturdays, but it didn't help that there was a crying baby this morning, so it was a very unrestful night.
We got to start talking about this goal setting.
It's the thing is with like I Saturday nights is kind of like one of my like only nights where I can, just I don't really go out, but go out to a friend's or just hang out in a social distanced way. And I usually end up staying late because I don't have to. It's like the one time I really don't have to wake up early. So yeah, I gotta stop doing that.
Can you wake up early?
I mean, yeah, I always do wake up early, but I don't want to wake up early. That's the thing.
Well, but I'm really excited about today because I'm excited that we're going to learn not just from peers today. You found some really cool people that we're going to be talking about mental health with mental health professionals.
Yes. So normally, for those who regularly tune into the show or don't tune into the show, each week we do a different topic around mental health. We've done mental health and humor, mental health and ADHD, mental health and relationships, mental health and setting goals. Like we try and tackle every single topic relating to mental health. But this will be our first episode on mental health with mental health professionals. However, the key thing to remember is we are not mental health professionals. We are just peers offering advice based on our own personal experience and subjective opinions. Any advice here is not intended to treat, diagnose, or prevent any illness or injury.
Yeah.
So I guess with that being said, should we bring our guests on?
I think we should.
Awesome. First starting with Andy Hall. Andy, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Hell yeah. If you could tell the crowd, the audience a little bit about your background.
My name is Andy Hall. I have an undergraduate in psychology. I've done some graduate work in psychology. I've worked in the field of mental health for over 20 years. I have managed residential homes for men and women who have brain injuries. A lot of those injuries were caused by substance abuse or just from 20-something-year-old behaviors, these kind of behaviors that we've all done, and they just got unlucky. So I've also been in marriage therapy, if that means anything, as well as personal therapy.
Well, I should have known you like 2 years ago when my marriage was falling apart. I could have been like, "Hey, Andy, give me a hand over here." There was nothing you could have done to save the marriage. It was kaput.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, we the final straw was my little kitty. Unfortunately, he had an aggressive past, and that should show you how bad the relationship got. But the thing is, we remain friends now to this day. She's actually one of my best friends. We just both recognize, like, dude, we should not be together at all. Like when we're living separate and we're just friends, best relationship ever. The second we're living together, we are not good for each other. We'll both end up being like negative towards one another. But now I'm just rambling.
Well, that's wisdom that you just dropped down there, because it isn't just for our romantic relationship, but it's also all of our relationships. Some personalities are like gasoline on the fire.
Right. Yeah, that's actually a good way to put it. Now I'd like to bring on our other guest, Daniel Fisk Bennett. Daniel, how are you?
Hey, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Yourself?
Doing all right.
Tell the audience, the people watching at home, a little bit about yourself.
So I am a psychology and interdisciplinary studies major. I work as a residential counselor, typically with people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, as well as people suffering from comorbid drug addictions and other issues like major depressive disorder, also known as dysthymia. So those are my that's my kind of expertise. I want to make sure I'm clear that I'm speaking on behalf of myself and not on behalf of where I work for. So, and same kind of Hippocratic, what's it called? Anyways, yeah, not intended to treat, diagnose, or prevent any injury. That whole spiel.
Real quick, we just had someone comment on your audio. Could you maybe just try turning your microphone in to your mouth as close as possible? I know, like, we're kind of limited, but everything we can do just to get that mic closer.
How's that?
Not the same.
Oh no.
This is why I got to learn to do more like audio tests prior to. So those watching, sorry, we weren't able to get this taken care of, so we'll do our best to navigate these waters. For those watching, if you have any questions for myself, Jenna, Daniel, or Andy, feel free to put them in the comments. Please tag the Ethan and Jenna Show or YF an Atheist, or you can call the number at the bottom of the screen, 708-554-7836, and just make sure you have your question ready to go. I do have our first question from the audience. I don't know who this might be more directed at, like Jenna and I. I'm not sure. I need help recovering from nationalist and religious feedback loops. What can atheists do to help the mental health medical community that has been protected bias for religious gaslighting? I don't know how to address that.
What can atheists do to, I'm sorry. What can atheists do to help the mental health medical community?
Ian, I think I would, if you could rephrase your question. I'm not really sure how to answer what you're asking.
How about we alternate between questions from the audience and callers? And I've got a few questions that I've looked up here that I know are common questions asked just in general, you know, people who are new to the topic of mental health, especially new to considering, you know, should I get a therapist? Should I wait? Should I not? Should I just call into a peer, you know, call-in group, or, you know, when is it bad enough, and all these things. So I thought that we could start with just a few questions. First question is, when should someone start looking for a mental health professional?
Andy, you want to go on that one, or you want me to go first?
I'll start. Why not? I would say that if you feel that you're having thoughts, feelings that are getting in the way of working or loving or everyday life, then that could be a sign. That could be a sign that you may it may be beneficial to talk to somebody. If you have friends and family who are making suggestions, that could be a sign too. If you find yourself saying things and afterwards reflecting, and well, that just seemed really not appropriate for the situation that I was in, then that could also be a sign. So it's a variety of factors.
Yeah, I would also say look for changes in behavior. If you notice you're, for instance, starting to get messy, you're sleeping at weird times, people are commenting on your appearance, those are definite things that are big warning flags, especially the whole commenting on appearance. The other one I would say is noticing a drop in your work. If there's an increase in the amount of times that you're having to call out because of personal, unrelated issues, you know, you just don't feel up to it. There are other things like if there's dishes that are just starting to build up in your sink and you just don't have the resolve. Those are things. If you're in school and you notice your schoolwork is starting to drag behind. If you had a traumatic event, especially if you've had a traumatic event, that is always really high on the priority list to go see somebody, because those issues tend to fester.
What qualifies as a traumatic event?
Well, a lot of things could qualify as a traumatic event. It's really an event that would be significant enough to impact your life in a negative way. Uh, Something as simple as an auto accident could cause someone to have PTSD. Uh, but any other things, uh, rape, uh, seeing something violent. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
It is, Daniel is right, is that it is subjective. There's no doubt about it. I think therapists would say that the traditional stressors are death in the family, for an example, a breakup in a romantic relationship, a change in work environment, a financial hit. All of those can be a triggering event.
So what I'm finding is that it's not like you said, like it's not a blanket statement. It kind of depends person to person.
Right. Mental health psychology, it's not it's not chemistry. It's therapy is in many ways an art. There is a science behind it too, but it's not like you're doing geometry.
Mm.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, what is possibly a traumatic experience for one person may not be traumatic for another. Example: the first time, the first night I ever DJ'd, I got jumped by 5 people. It sucked so much. Now, some would probably view that as a traumatic event, and while it is, a part of my past, I don't necessarily view it as such. Is that accurate? Where it can affect somebody else very differently?
I I would totally agree with that. I was held up at gunpoint twice, and because I've done stand up comedy, and I did a 10-minute stand up routine based on that experience, which might have been therapeutic in itself to help me work it out. But yeah, different people just respond to things differently.
Right.
Yeah.
So then how do you know who you should start seeing if you have seen, witnessed a traumatic event? How do you know where to go first?
There are a couple routes you could go. Sometimes it could be something as simple as going over to a mental health facility and then just asking for a triage and see where you would fit in. That especially if it was a rather traumatic incident. So instead of you having to do all the footwork and seeing if you could find it, you could actually go to mental health facilities and actually say, hey, this happened. What would you recommend? And actually have the medical experts guide you down the right path.
So to spell it out like black and white, I could go to Google and just type mental health facilities near me.
Yeah.
Okay. Just
So
want
is
to
it,
clarify.
and I, again, let me know if I'm wrong here. Is it a safe assessment to only recommend people go to a hospital for mental health as a last resort, and should more be focused on trying to get to a mental health hospital? And what I mean by that is for one, I made the mistake of going to a hospital, and so I sat down with the nurses and I was like, okay, look, I need to be honest and express what's happening in my head, but I need you to understand that I know the difference between the thoughts, the suicidal ideation I'm having, and actions, and I will not act on that. And they were like, yeah, that's fine. But within 5 seconds of opening my mouth, they immediately escalated the situation by grabbing security, ripping the stuff out of my hands, locking down the medicine cabinets. And I'm like that put me into instant, like, oh my God, what is happening? What are you doing to me? And like, I immediately felt like my autonomy was ripped from me.
Yep.
Now, I think the biggest mistake I made was going to a regular hospital. What are your thoughts on that?
Every hospital is not the same. When I was a house manager, there were places that you did not want to send somebody when they were having a psychiatric incident, just because they were the quote unquote bad places. Their levels of services just weren't that high. Unfortunately, when you're in a crisis, it's difficult to be able to make a decision. What is the good hospital? What is the bad hospital?
Right.
Yeah.
And it is also difficult for an ER to understand. You are a person that just came in. They don't know you. You are in a possible suicidal crisis. They don't know how bad it may be. That if you are sitting there just kind of let's say mildly struggling versus someone who is about 3 seconds from grabbing something and doing something to themselves. It's hard. So sometimes their reaction is almost, full lockdown. And it really depends on where you go. Andy is 100% right. So and I'm not saying this to dissuade anybody. If you are feeling that you are in crisis, it is better to go and get yourself taken care of than not. But if you have a regular a lot of psych hospitals, it's not, there are a lot of places where you have walk-in treatments. You could call ahead of time and you could ask, do you have walk-ins? And and if they say yes, you go. It's as simple as you show up. I would recommend though reading the things, because especially if you are expecting to maybe spend some time there, read what you can and can't take with you. Psych hospitals do have a list typically of what you can and can't take with you, and just make sure you have that all kind of set up for yourself. And when you go there, they could help triage you and actually help form a plan to take care of you. That way, you could get optimal care. Mental health is no different than regular health. This is you trying to take care of something and you wanting to get better and reach some sort of whatever you would see as normal.
For like one of the things, unfortunate lessons I feel I learned from that event was to not open my mouth. Like, let's say I don't have access to a mental health hospital and that happens to me again. I personally, and this is not what I recommend to anybody, but I don't think I'd actually be comfortable going to a hospital again. I think I would rather be miserable at home where I have access to my phone and my friends than be in a hospital, because when that happened, I had no contact with people for almost like 24, 28 hours. There was, and because of COVID, they weren't allowing you to mix together. I didn't speak to a doctor. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a game. I laid there in a bed, absolutely miserable, only focused on the suicidal ideation going on in my head. So to me, they made me far worse off than I was, because at least out here, I had the support.
I think it's really important to have support systems when you are well or less sick, to think about where you would go in case you are in crisis. If you have a therapist, talk to the therapist beforehand in regular sessions about, hey, in case I'm in crisis, where do you recommend me to go? For an example, I live in the Boston area.
Okay.
So I know where I'm going in case I get physically ill. I know I'm going to go to Mass General. They have great services there. There are people who would go to Fenway Health down by the Fenway. They give great services down there for people who don't have the financial means to pay for them. So when you're well, it's good to set up a support structure for yourself.
Jenna, I did want to say we should get to our caller in just a moment, but it looked like you wanted to say something.
Well, I was just going to say that since we're already on that topic, that was going to be one of my questions was, and I was going to, trigger warning to anybody that's sensitive on the topic of suicide, obviously, this is the thing is, I'm under the impression that suicidal doesn't only mean that you're absolutely to the point of actually attempting suicide. It means having regular thoughts about it as well, right? That qualifies as suicidal.
There's more to it. I mean, you could also have other kinds of behaviors, reckless, planning. There are warning signs also, but yes, that is at least something you could add on to the list.
So then the reason I just wanted to ask this, since we were just still on the topic right before we get to the first caller, is when you have somebody that has these suicidal thoughts constantly, and they have these regular periods where they come to that, they can't necessarily afford to go and check themselves into a clinic every single time they get to this point. So that's kind of where it gets kind of confusing, and you just kind of get to, well, I guess I'll just wait until it gets bad enough. But then when is that?
This
Right.
is why managed care is very important. This is why I made the initial uh, statement of going into a mental health facility and talking to them, so that way they could build a plan. So that way you have a crisis plan. If a crisis plan needs to be initiated, you have your primary care for primary mental health care. Excuse me. You'll be able to get integrated care. So that way it's not just, oh, I'm going to go and talk to my shrink every Tuesday. It's no, you'll have groups if you need groups. There's a support network. There are and usually with mental health.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, I pushed the button. Usually with mental health, there is a snowball kind of thing. It's not just like I could just point out one thing and it's right there. It's usually a combination of things. So it has to come from multiple angles, and that's why it is important for, if you're having issues, go to a clinic, and that way they could actually put together a care plan for you.
Yeah.
And you have that, okay, if I'm in crisis and I'm feeling like I'm on the precipice, you have direct lines to contact, and they could you could actually have it all set up. It's better that way than just going to an ER, for instance.
Yep.
And if you don't have like a community already set up, then they can try to help you build one.
Exactly.
Okay.
I find it easier to manage my own anxiety if I have a plan. If I have a plan in place, then that just makes it feel more manageable.
Right.
That's a good idea.
And
Because we all have those periods where we get low, and we get sad. So that sounds like a completely logical thing to have.
And to anyone calling in, just before we get to our first caller, please note, if you could just have your question ready to go so we can give it to them and move, because we may be getting, we're getting a lot of comments and some callers, so we want to try and get to everybody as best as we can. So please keep it quick and to the point. All right, let's take our first caller. By the way, trigger warning for everyone watching. I don't have a call screener set up yet. I'm trying to figure out a way to do it myself in the meantime, but let's get to our first caller. The parents want to talk about, this person's parents don't think mental health is a real problem. Hi, what was your name?
Hi, my name's Sky. How are y'all doing today?
Good, and yourself?
Hi, Sky.
I'm doing pretty good. I have the day off work today, so I was finally able to call in. So that's a great day.
Yay.
All right, what would you like to ask?
So my parents are religious. I am no longer religious, but they don't know that yet. And I'm the oldest of 4 siblings. So my 3 siblings are still like 11, 12, they're still pretty young. When I was growing up, my dad was diagnosed with a personality disorder.
Okay.
And there was a lot of traumatic events that happened around that and stuff. And I needed to be in therapy when I was like 14 or so. But because my parents are religious and think, just back up, God has got it. You need to just trust God more and stuff. I was never helped. I went to a very bad place, and it was a very bad time for me growing up. I am better now because I realized I had to go see a therapist. It wasn't just me, all this stuff. But I'm seeing the same trend in my siblings now. And I was just wondering if you guys had ever had anything like that where you had to like explain to your parents, no, this is not fake. This is not messed up. They need help. And talk about it.
Thanks, Allison. We'll answer that and get you some professional responses, and we'll give you our own personal responses. But we'll hang up with you now. But we will answer. Thank you, Allison.
Okay.
Or Sky, sorry.
Okay.
So Andy, Daniel, what do y'all think?
Andy, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, Sky, congratulations. I just want to say you did the right thing by getting yourself into therapy, and you are spot on about being concerned about your younger siblings. It is a difficult slog to go through. dealing with these kind of family systems and trying to navigate them, especially when there are young children involved. A lot of the times, especially as an older child, you can be adultified. You can be an adult child. So there are these, within family systems, there are these children who feel like they have to take on adult roles. And the good thing is that you went to go see a therapist and that you're able to manage that kind of issue. In terms of your siblings, school systems can be a way to get people into services. When I was in middle school, my sister ran away from home a number of times. And one of the things that helped my family get into services, for me to get help, was me just crying in front of my guidance counselor and sharing stories. Because there is this kind of cult of silence, and telling stories, it's so important.
And unfortunately, there is an old machismo kind of way to look at mental health where they view it as almost more weakness than anything else. And that a lot of times is in some ways at a root of a lot of these issues, is they view it as personal weakness and not as strength. Because admitting that you have something going on with you, it doesn't even have to be a problem, just something going on with you, and wanting to get help, that is strength. That is not weakness. Weakness is you having something going on and refusing to do something about it, and just letting it continue. So, I really want to say you're strong, Sky, for getting yourself taken care of and worrying for your family as well. And I do really wish you the best. And I would just advise to be as supportive as you can, and don't let them beat you into submission on that.
So there's a follow-up from Sky. I agree. However, their family homeschools, which helps them in academic ways, but not in this way. What do we do in that situation, or how can we help them?
That's when it comes to homeschooling, that does make it difficult. I would just have to say that, if it gets too bad, obviously, if you worry about their safety, there is the nuclear option, getting CPS involved.
Yep.
If it gets too bad, especially if you are worried about their physical safety. But if they're not being physically harmed, it does make it tricky, and you're just going to have to do your best to be as supportive. And if your parents are throwing stuff out there, the best I could say is just make sure your family knows what the actual answers are, and not these flamboyant, strange, exotic religious answers that they come up with.
Yeah. I just want to say too, I just want to add on to what Daniel was saying. Here in the state of Massachusetts, you can anonymously make a report in case you do suspect that there's abuse going on. That being said, just being there and offering your younger siblings support, they will appreciate it for years to come, for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Regarding your comment, like, about weakness, that is actually something I still struggle with, because I was one of those people that was heavily taught or indoctrinated with that talking about your mental struggles is a weakness, and men don't do that. They tough it out. And if you did complain, it was, like, well, you're just kind of being a weakling right now. Just get over it. So that is still drilled in my head. Like, there's times I'll go to, like, vent to someone, and then I'll immediately stop myself, because I'm just like, I don't want to complain. I'm being a pansy with this. I don't want to do it. And I know that that's not rational. I don't think I'm actually being a pansy, but those thoughts are still in my head, which prevent me from many times opening up. Or there's times I've opened up to friends, and within 5 minutes, I'm like, I'm sorry, just forget it. I'm only complaining now. I don't worry about it. And it's, how do you get past that feeling?
Well, that's for one, that's part of the toxic masculinity that's in our society, where it shows anytime you have adversity, that having any emotion attached to that adversity somehow makes you weak. And really, the honest answer is no, it doesn't make you weak. The fact that you're acknowledging it makes you strong. And I think that goes back to a kind of mindset from a long time ago that's really dated and that we do need to get past.
Hmm.
I completely understand where you're coming from, Ethan. I'm a military veteran. I know what it's like to have that kind of toxic masculinity, that chest beating kind of mentality, where to be anything other than manly men doing manly things was to be seen as weak and worthless.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm with you on that. I broke my leg when I was 9 years old, partly because I have this minor disability. And my father gave me a call up from work, and he said, "Today you are a man." I'm like, what does that mean? I broke my leg, and now somehow I'm a man?
Does that mean I became a man in the 7th grade when I broke my arm?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, it does.
But to be seriously, it gets better. I'm gonna bite Dan Savage's style here, because he had the "It Gets Better" campaign. But as you get older and you do the work, it gets better.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. It's the more I try to focus on my mental health, the more open I am, and the better I am at trying to resolve or think about some of these things in a positive way. And a lot of it has to do with my language that I'm trying to catch up on. One of the therapists and Jenna have actually caught me on it a few times. Like, I don't realize I'm doing it. I will make a negative comment about saying, like, well, I'm just kind of being weak about this, or I'll paint my issue in a negative light, and then like Jenna or that therapist have followed up with, well, why are you calling it this? And I need to stop viewing any mental health issues as an automatic negative. And I'd also like to get to this comment. As a Christian, I've been told my PTSD and anxiety is a spiritual issue, and then I need to pray it away. It's really messed up. That's a terrible thing. And since you're a Christian, there is someone I would recommend listening to. It's this guy, Dan Jacob, from the Dear Christians podcast. And he basically goes after, I shouldn't say goes after, but he calls out these right-leaning Christians who try and force prayer instead of mental health on it. So if you need something to show your family from a Christian perspective, that heavily pushes mental health, I would recommend checking out his podcast.
Yeah. Prayer is not therapy.
No. The reality is, I mean, you got the same kind of. There's plenty of studies out there, plenty of studies that shows efficacy of prayer. That sadly it's bupkis, and I'm trying not to denigrate, your personal beliefs, but when it comes down to the empirical evidence, there is no evidence that supports the power of prayer as far as what the science has to show.
Right.
If it offers you any personal catharsis, that's between you and however you want to view it. But when it comes down to legitimate treatment, that is, I could argue that it's not treatment. It's no different than going to a church to deal with a broken leg. You're not going to get the kind of help that you need from a church that you would from an actual mental health facility. That's a
good analogy. I like that. We should probably get to our next caller.
Well, before we do that, I wanted to respond to Sky. As an older sibling who has come out of a household that I don't necessarily define as healthy. So just to give from my own personal experience, what I can say, and from learning from getting to several different therapists and caring and worrying a lot about younger siblings at times. the best thing that I think that I could do was to be an example rather than to try to tell them what to do, just like parents tend to tell kids what to do. Instead of telling them what to do, be open with them about what you're doing and what benefit you get from it, because they're more likely to kind of listen and learn from your experience, and rather than take it as like a dictation. And show them that you love them. So when you worry about them and when you want to tell them that you love them, do that. Every time you want to tell them that you love them, do that, because I think that that's not something that unhealthy households show a lot of. Also, to reassure yourself in the case that you can't do anything, because a lot of the times it's not as bad at enough to report it to CPS or anything like that, to remember that you made it out just, and are surviving on your own, and that they can do it too. So I just wanted to say that.
All right. So next caller, Jason, you are on with Ethan and Jenna and our lovely guests. How you doing?
What's up, man?
Not much. How are you?
Long time listener, first time caller.
Awesome.
Hi.
Thanks for calling in. What did you ask?
Yeah, well, so I work with senior citizens, and I have this theory, and I'm wondering why it isn't thought about more. So when I work with Alzheimer's patients and they are having, let's say, a rough time at their nursing home or memory care facility, and they get sent to the hospital, oftentimes they come back worse.
Yeah.
And everyone's just kind of like, oh, I don't know why. Like, oh, man, that stinks. And I believe it's because of bedside manner. It's pretty simple, but I'm going to kind of give a visual. And I don't know, Ethan, if you can pull up Maslow's hierarchy, a picture of it. But basically, for those that don't know, it's a pyramid of order of operation on how clinical staff take care of a patient. And it goes all the way up from body to spiritual. The issue is the spiritual is at the top, and the soul and the mind and all of the cognitive pieces. So it's thought of last usually. But if we flipped it and gave a holistic care plan where you actually had a behavioral team that's job was to treat the Maslow's hierarchy in reverse and basically create a diamond instead of a pyramid, you have a holistic care plan that is able to prepare someone who had to go to the hospital, let's say for a UTI or something simple like that. And you could have this behavioral team that's there for the transition piece, because that's the most detrimental thing. And I can pretty much prove that, not just with seniors, but with everybody. Like, when something major changes in your life, it feels traumatic. We've been taught that change is traumatic, and yet it's the constant. And so we're not, I mean, yes, there's an issue with mental health in general in the world, but why is it that healthcare has such a hard time buying in to the idea, and just, your opinions, to the idea that the behavioral piece is important, but not as important? And what steps that you maybe are aware of that you see that it's maybe pushing the other direction? My example in the real world would be how we're trying to demilitarize the police and create behavioral counselors and behavioral training so we can do de-escalation and crisis management better. So why aren't we able to kind of enact that in other parts of our system?
Okay, that's a lot to take in at once. Okay, so one thing that we tend to forget, especially in assisted living, is the mental health of the actual patients we take care of. Nursing homes, unfortunately, are notorious for not attending to the mental health of their seniors. They see the physical effects, like the buildup of the plaque and they will notate the behavior, but there is a dehumanizing aspect. And when someone goes to a hospital, they get poked and prodded, and they're in an unfamiliar place, and it's not pleasant for them. So it's no surprise to hear that they are worse when they come back because they're probably miserable.
Mm.
Their mental faculties cognitively they may be disrupted or impaired, but they still have human emotions and they are not somehow completely wiped away. They're not full zombies. They still have cares. You could still see them laugh, smile, cry, etc. So their mental health will have an effect on their physical health and their overall cognitive abilities as well. You will see declines in that if they are unhappy.
It's true. And, when you go to a hospital, you can have your agency taken away. You have control over your environment, over your own body in a lot of ways taken away. And for people who are cognitively fragile, it just affects them negatively and in many times severely too.
Sorry, cognitively fragile. Could you define what you mean by that?
Well, for example, if you're elderly, I've worked with elderly people too. If you already have pre-existing issues with your executive functions live up here in the forebrain. And Daniel knows what I'm talking about. I'm sure a lot of people in the chat and here too. It's about being able to sequence events. It's about being able to think logically. And a lot of that, for those people who are cognitively fragile, are based on having a consistent environment, an environment that they feel like they have control over. They may actually care for something in their environment, like a plant or a cat. And there have been a bunch of mindfulness studies that have shown that if you have to care for something, then you will do better cognitively across the board. So you have all of that taken away from you. And once again, it's bad enough if your frontal lobes are working well, but if you're fragile, if you already have dementia, if you already have a brain injury of some kind, then yeah, that can cause a feedback loop of bad.
I do have a couple, actually follow-up questions, but instead I want to make sure first, real quick, Jason, before we let you go, did that answer your question or did you have a quick follow-up?
Well, just I guess a quick follow-up. I agree with everything you just said, and what I would add to it is that I think one of the things that we're doing a disservice to is the way that we categorize where people's cognitive fragility, level is. For instance, we do cognitive tests where we say, what day of the week is it? Who's the president? And if I'm 97 and I've got Alzheimer's, that's the last thing I care about. So I'm probably not going to know. And so if I was asked more questions like, do you know any of the people that you sit with at lunch? And, the way that, because I'm ADD, I'm ADHD, neurodivergent, and I was diagnosed when I was 8. Mm-hmm. And back then it was looked at as a thing you push to the side because we really didn't know we knew what it did, but we didn't know really how to treat it. We had drugs like Ritalin, we had drugs like Concerta and Adderall, and it was doing things, but it was such a taboo. And it's very much how we used to classify Alzheimer's as senile or other cognitive dementia, progressive dementia things as senile. And now that's taboo because we know that there's a spectrum, just like autism, just like ADHD. So, do you think that if we changed how we classified people and started treating things more like these spectrums, that there might be a way to better give a personalized care plan that is holistic?
Yeah, definitely. The more individualized care, the better the person will do. That's why it's so important for caregivers, family members to be actively involved in a person's treatment at all levels. And I'll also say this.
They're just never educated. That's the issue. That's the biggest issue. The people I work with, when they leave with the diagnosis, they have no idea what to do next other than medically.
Yeah.
Well, but the problem is, isn't it that it's hard enough to diagnose people with what they have because these diagnoses are relatively new in general, aren't they? So to come up with enough diagnoses, and not only that, but to measure out how much on what side and how many different sides each one goes, you know what I mean? It just seems like we're just not there yet. I mean, it seems like an awesome goal,
Part
And
of the
I think it can be achieved. You know, it's funny, but like, there's some residents I work with that are atheists, and I've mentioned Ethan's show specifically because I think it would be refreshing for them to hear someone in their 20s, in their 30s. The people that you bring on are just kind of normal people talking about things. And one of the things that there's like a conspiracy theory out there that the reason we didn't like ADD people is because we ask why. And that doesn't work well in this society. And when seniors get started to be pushed to the side, it's because they start asking why. And they start wanting to hold on to their identity and hold on to their individualism. And it starts being plucked away, as one of you said today. And then they're forced to like hold on tight to whatever they have left. And then we're looking at them like they're the crazy ones. And I think that we could flip that both with getting people like Ethan and Jenna shows, and like I play podcasts for them. I do a Buddhism one for them like 2 times a month, and like they're asking real questions, and probably for the first time in their lives. And so I feel like if we approached it like that reverse Maslow, that's really where we can give them a full care plan that is individualized, and at the same time can use some broad spectrum treatments and broad spectrum programming that can add to their daily life. So anyway, thank you for all the reassuring of my theories.
Thank you for calling.
Thanks,
in,
Jason.
It's nice talking to you.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you, Ethan. Bye.
Before I get to my questions, is there anything you wanted to reply to, anything he said, or any follow-up on that?
I think one of the big challenges that we face here in the United States of America is moving away from this kind of punitive culture to more of a nurturing culture. And once we build institutions that are more focused on nurturing people as against to punishing people, all of our, we are the world's richest country, and we will be able to meet these issues. It isn't that we don't know how, it's a matter of getting them executed, of getting them, getting the right politicians in there and the right policies passed.
Yep.
So jumping back real quick to your cognitive fragility?
Yeah.
Would this be an example of that? So for instance, after I had to go to that mental health hospital, my anxiety for a few months was like, or a month specifically, like I couldn't handle normal conversations as I normally could. It was like I was more easily triggered for like a month following the event. Is that an example of cognitive fragility?
I think it would be, sure, because, it's so important to try to build up a sense of resiliency as much as you can by building good relationships, good diet, good sleep patterns. As a person who has apnea and disturbed sleep patterns, it's difficult for me to do all the things I know that I need to do,
right,
to keep myself psychologically resilient. Yeah.
Okay, so on that note, and talking about, kind of, Ethan, you said that you weren't traumatized by those 5 guys that jumped you, right? And I'm curious because I've been through sexual assault, which at the time I thought that I wasn't traumatized because I was like, well, I'm fine, nothing's changed, I'm great, everything's okay. And then years later, I started having really bad nightmares.
Yeah.
And started having a lot more side effects from it, and then found out later that I was traumatized from it. So, I mean, I'm just curious if y'all have any thoughts on that.
So to follow up real quick on that is maybe I misspoke because, well, I do know I have some trauma, but I guess I've always related it to being in the bar. So, for example, say someone comes up behind me and grabs my shoulder or like semi-startles me, I have an instant physical reaction. Now, granted, I don't hit the person, but right away my heart's in my chest and I'm like this. Like when I'm in bars and restaurants, I make sure my back is against the wall. I do everything I can to pick the right seat so that I have visibility of everything. Now, I thought that came from just the years of continuous bar brawls that would get started. And I, because I worked at the bar, I had to do everything I could to help mitigate the situation. But I mean, maybe that is from that first event, or maybe it's a combination of all of them. I don't know.
When it comes down to when it comes to psychology and whatnot, it's really hard to point at something in specific. A lot of people like doing the whole dartboard, dead centers here and everything's around it. It's really hard to just go dead center. I mean, psychology is not one of those kinds of things where you could just point at one thing and be like, that right there is the source of the problem. It's a multifaceted thing. So, I mean, we always have to be careful not to just, lump it all into one thing and be like, hey, look, this right here, this one thing in your life is the center of all your problems.
Right.
If we just address this one thing, you will be completely fine and you will be a Nobel laureate in no time.
Yeah. I just want to speak to what Jenna was saying a little while ago. I have the same experiences. There are moments of realization that I just go, oh, that happened to me. And these are things that have happened 30 years ago, maybe even 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow. And then all of a sudden you have to deal with all the emotions. I mean, even just me telling, I've never told the story. My children don't know it. I don't think any of my ex-wife doesn't know it. No one that I've dated knew the story about me crying in front of my middle school guidance counselor. This is the first time I've said it. And to tell you the truth, I had to deal with that emotion for like maybe a couple of seconds here on screen. And so it is a journey. That's what it is. It is a journey and an exploration.
Thank you for that.
Frank, there is you can call it is a number. You just have to enter the country code. So you'd enter your country code and then 1-708-554-7836, or there is also a link in the description of this video that has a link you can click that turns it into a phone call from your computer or mobile device, and it connects over VoIP. I don't think we've ever covered this before. I actually don't know what psychotropics are.
I don't either.
Psychotropics, that's usually your magic mushrooms, your...
Oh, psychedelics?
Yeah.
We actually have done an episode on that, didn't we, Jenna?
Yeah.
Mental health and drugs.
Yeah.
And I got to say, again, own personal experience, not a doctor, and not recommending that you immediately go out and purchase illegal drugs and start doing it. I spent plenty of time researching and found that trying mushrooms was in the best interest for me, and I did have a good experience. I suffer from epilepsy, and while I don't have diagnosed brain damage, it is of my opinion that I do have some type of brain damage because my memories for a 5-year period of time are pretty much non-existent. And at times I have trouble getting words out. Like I can't locate the words inside my head. After doing that, I felt my brain speed up a little bit and start to get back to normal, how it was prior to me suffering from epilepsy. But again, I am not recommending that you immediately go out this to treat your condition in any capacity. This was only what I did to help myself based on the available evidence.
Psychopharmacology is still an emerging science, and there's still a lot we don't know about the brain and chemicals' influences on the brain. I would advise to be very cautious about using anything that's psychotropic, especially if you have some other kinds of mental illness, especially something like schizophrenia or a dysthymia, and maybe even ADHD. There are a lot of things we don't know, and being that it is an uncontrolled substance, in that kind of respect, you are rolling the dice. So what may have worked for one person may not work the same for another person. People are not cookie cutters. Our brain chemistry is not the same. I mean, just the four of us here, we're all 4 different people on this little podcast, and what may affect one person one way will affect the other person a completely different way. So, yeah.
And to be fair, taking psychedelics does not equate doing mushrooms.
Yes.
Those are a little bit different.
Yeah, it was just one of the quickest things that I could throw out there that was instantly recognizable.
No, I was just saying that for our audience, just to be clear, because we kind of assumed that those are kind of hand in hand.
But so mushrooms are a psychedelic, but you're saying there's psychedelics that aren't mushrooms. Is that
LSD? That's probably one of the most well-known ones right there.
well, and the mushrooms have shown, or psilocybin has shown to have some positive effects on depression and anxiety. However, it's where I would advise people to be careful if they ever try it is if you are, unlike marijuana at times, if you use the correct strain, you could be really, really anxious and it will bring you down. It's helped me from like going into anxiety attacks. However, with psilocybin mushrooms, while it can relieve anxiety, it's not going to relieve it if you have it in that moment. And the one of the worst things you can do, in my opinion, is if you are very anxious that day and you're not in a safe environment, do not, under any circumstances, try them, because it, in a way, amplifies that, and you will find yourself going down a mental hole very quickly if you do that when you're not in the best shape.
It's an interesting point that you bring up, Ethan, about when you do go or try something new, whether it's regular medication or doing mushrooms or whatever. It's good to let the people know around you, like, some trusted friends, some trusted people, that, oh, I am trying this. I'm on a new pill. I'm on Chantix, for an example. That I had a friend who was on Chantix for a while, and there were some real behavioral consequences of that. So yeah, it's good to once again, have your support system and let your support system know important information.
Especially if you're going to be trying something new for the first time.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is, like, at least for me, some people like to jump right in and take a big dose. No way. Like, if you don't have any experience in this area, start small. You need to, in my opinion, know what you're getting yourself into. So I took baby steps. I tried a small amount, then I tried a little more, and then I tried a larger dose.
And one other thing, it's not even just how you feel at the time that you take it, because I'm one of those people that I can exhibit some bipolar-like traits from PTSD. So I can be set off pretty quickly, and my mood can change very, very quickly. And so I have to be careful that I'm not around anything that can trigger me very easily as well.
I would also want to caution against using anything that's not a controlled, substance in a non-controlled environment. Chemicals interact, especially in the body, because there's a lot of variables. I mean, way more than that could be listed in this show, ever. And if you are already, for instance, on a medication, if you're taking a non-controlled substance, you never quite know how that could react. And it is, I would say, from a more for professional side, it is not recommended that you try something like that, especially if you are already taking medication of some kind.
Yep.
And go do more research than from everything that you just heard right here.
Do not take my word as what you should do.
Yeah.
And the important thing to note is what he said is, if you're on other medications, you have to make sure that it doesn't interact with those medications in a negative way. I mean, if you decide to take a chance, please be as responsible as possible. And once again, it affects everyone differently. I am not, under any circumstance, recommending that anybody watching this broadcast go and try the things I've tried.
Real quick, right before we get to the last caller, I just had one more question that I really wanted to ask, and that is, when I'm diagnosed with anything, say it's ADHD, anxiety, depression, anything, can it and will it go away?
So I like, a lot of us in the mental health field like using the word remission.
Okay.
There are some things that you can be in remission of. Like, for instance, you had a depressive episode, something was onset, you had an outside source. It wasn't. We're talking more of something physiological happened to you. You had something that created the environment for you to have this acquired mental illness. Those kinds of things you can deal with differently. Now, if you have something more physiological like schizophrenia, that is more a managed thing that you treat more like type 1 diabetes. So it just really depends. I mean, this is not a magic bullet kind of thing. There are so many variables in that question. So that is a very hard question to even answer in the right way.
Well, so if it's a mental health thing, like say it's anxiety or depression, and you've been diagnosed with a disorder, is that it can go away or it cannot, or like
it can ebb and flow. The studies have shown that there are some age groups that are just happier than others, to tell you the truth. I just, believe it or not, I happen to be in one of the happiest age groups around. I'm just lucky. There have been times that I've been miserable. And part of that is just the kind of life stressors that get put on you by society at different stages of your life. So for some people, on the average, I'll just say this, on the average, yes, there are some points in your life that you're going to be happier than others just because of the age that you're in.
In the mental health field, they always like to use, recovering from a mental illness, and that is the way that we would like to frame it as recovering from. So it's a process. You could definitely get to a much happier, healthier place, learning to manage to the point where it's not even something that you think about very often. I had diagnosed PTSD. I saw some horrible things in the military. But these are not things that completely train wreck my life every day because I've learned to manage, to cope. I've been given the tools and skills to deal with it. But everyone's going to be different. They're going to approach their own issues differently. So can you, in some ways, can you overcome? Yes, with an asterisk.
Yeah.
So to kind of piggyback off of what Jenna was saying, so I obviously had been diagnosed with ADHD, anxiety, and depression. Does that mean that for the rest of my life I have this chemical? If this may be a loaded question or bad question, or simply I may not be understanding it correctly. But say I get it under control, am I still more prone, or is that chemical imbalance going to be there for the rest of my life? So for instance, say I'm happy for the next 10 years. Am I still chemically or neurologically prone to depression coming back?
That is a question that is a little bit too hard to answer in the way that, and the reason why I say that is your body changes as you get older. Andy definitely touched on that quite a lot. So what may have been affecting, for instance, everyone knows teenagers act differently than adults,
Right.
and 20-year-olds act different than 60-year-olds. These are things what may have been an issue for you then may not be an issue for you later, but what was an issue for you then may still be an issue for you later. These are things that you cannot cookie cutter when it comes to mental health. You can never just, as I said, point and be like, right there, that's it right there. And you're going to have to deal with that thing for the rest of your life. There have been cases where people have had schizophrenia go into remission. It's spectacular when it happens, but it happens.
I do have, and while I typically don't want us going near this topic, it's a direct question for you, Daniel. So if I don't know what this person's talking about, but can you explain atheist in your Facebook name? Is that in your Facebook name?
Atheist in my Facebook name. Not all theists will ignore science. I know. Atheist in my Facebook name. I don't have. I mean, Daniel Fisk Bennett is on there. I know I'm the founder of Atheists Against Pseudoscientific Nonsense and a couple other atheist groups, but I don't quite know what the question's being asked of me.
Yeah, I didn't really get it either. All right, let's get to our last caller, Allison. If you could try and form it into a question as quickly as possible. Allison, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are all of you?
good to talk to you again.
Good. Okay, so I will try and sum this up as best as I can, as fast as I can. Okay. So when I was a kid, I struggled in school. I struggled with sleeping and being able to attend school every day. And then it progressed to like feeling like a failure, having low self-esteem, and then it progressed to depression, like feeling depressed and sad, and it just was mounting problems. Like, and then and then my mom died when I was 16, and so my support, and then I had no support system. So I was going to doctors and I was asking them, like, how come I'm having these sleeping problems? How come I feel this way? And they would give me a prescription for antidepressants and send me on my way. And then that was all they would do. And so, and then I tried like a couple counselors and it was the same thing. And so I was trying and I wasn't being taken seriously and I wasn't able to get support, even though I had all these traumatic things that had happened to me, and like I just was crying for help. And then as I got older, it just got worse. And then like I was having trouble keeping jobs because my sleeping was screwed, and then I would have spells of depression for like 6 months and stuff, and no family support, no understanding, and none of that. So I finally got to a point where I didn't want to live anymore, and sorry, trigger warning, I didn't want to live anymore, and I was suicidal. I had lots of ideation. So I went to the hospital, and then I specifically said I needed the mental health, psychiatric help, and they said that I spoke really articulately, and they thought that some CBT would help me, and then they sent me on my way. So I had a way different experience than you did, Ethan. I was actually surprised to hear what you shared earlier. So I started seeing the psychiatric services in the hospital, and I got diagnosed with ADHD. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that would explain a lot of my problems with concentrating and being able to work, and because my biggest problem was producing work.
Hey, Allison. Allison.
Okay, so
hey, Allison.
I'm getting there. Don't worry.
Okay, please, because we're very limited on time. So if you could get to the question, I'd really appreciate it.
So I went and I ended up like screwing up a job really bad, and then I was referred to get a psychoeducational assessment. And that assessment determined that I actually have a nonverbal learning disability, which I'm wondering if either of you have heard of. And I also was diagnosed with a bunch of other things. So I guess my question is one, have you heard of nonverbal learning disability before? And two, what can you do when you're not taken seriously and it's like you're at the point where it's like, okay, do I have to actually make a suicide attempt to get any kind of help?
Whoa.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no, don't make a suicide attempt. Please do not do that. That is not in your best interest or anyone's best interest. But two, I am very sorry that things have been a struggle for you. You are always entitled to second opinions in any healthcare. And if you are not satisfied with where you've gone, you are well within your right to go to a different place and tell them, and make sure you bring whatever documents you have. You could ask for printouts and say, hey, look, this is what they did, and I've had a net negative outcome, and therefore I'm looking for a net obvious positive outcome. So that way you could work. And this is why at the way beginning, I was talking about the importance of going to a clinic so you could have an integrated approach versus just sitting down with a psychiatrist and just saying, hey, look, pump me full of meds until I go numb.
Yeah.
So this is why it's important to go see integrated care versus other things. Because I mean, there could be other things that are going on. You could have, like Andy and I have sleep apnea. I know that has an effect on your mental health. You could have other things. There could be physiological as well as mental going on. With mental health, I keep saying this. It's not a dartboard. You can't point at bullseye and be like, hey, that is that. If we fix that one problem there, it'll all go away. It's not. It takes a lot to build on top of to actually get all these things sorted out. So
I just want to bounce off that too. If you have sometimes mental mood disorders can be, exacerbated. They can be made worse by having a physical disorder like apnea. So if a person can't get sleep, the first question I would think would be to do you have apnea? Is there a reason why you're getting up 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a night? Do you snore a lot? These are, so perhaps there's a physical element to resolve that will make the illness, the psychological symptoms get better.
Yeah, it's mental health is not a magic bullet. You can't find one thing and say, that right there, that fixes it. You have to have more. You got your group therapies, you got your psychiatrist, you have your psychologist, you have your clinical sit down, and then you have your physiological stuff. You see your doctor for other things. I mean, there could be other things going on. And this is why it's important to, instead of just getting passed off, double down, because a lot of times funding can be at the center of a lot of issues, especially depending on where you are. If you have bad healthcare in that state, they are notorious for not, for just writing something so they can put into the insurance provider and sending you on your way. And it sometimes, unfortunately, it falls to the patient to come back and be like, no, fix it. Right. And that's that's the imperfect healthcare system we have in the United States. So
awesome. Allison, I want to thank you. I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm actually in Canada, and I have encountered so much red tape trying to get any kind of help. But rest assured, I do have help now. Like I've got I am going to DBT, and I do have therapy, and I'm looking for a psychologist and or a psychiatrist, and I'm looking to get my sleep issues resolved. And they said it's upper respiratory resistance, so it's not like sleep apnea where I'm actually not breathing. It's like I'm taking more shallow breaths. And my nightmares, I get really bad nightmares too. So of course you're not going to be well rested after a night of nightmares. Right. So it's like I either sleep too much or not enough. And like, I just called in to see what your guys' advice is on how you handle a situation like mine where I had no support and I didn't know where to go, and like the professionals just weren't directing me anywhere, and they're leaving me hanging all the time, and I'm just like, okay, now what?
Right.
So
all right. Well, we'll answer that offline. Allison, thank you so much for calling in, and I hope you continue to get the help you need.
Thanks, Allison.
Thanks.
Did you have any final thoughts on that, Daniel or Andy or Jenna?
Never be afraid to hold their feet to the fire, and you are always entitled to a second opinion.
It sounds like Allison is walking her path, and she is getting herself into services, and just knowing there's a a physical problem with her sleep. That's incredible. That's great to know that, and know that once that gets resolved, your symptoms will probably get better over time.
I had a follow-up question about PTSD. So I've never been diagnosed with it, but how people describe it at times sounds like something I have. So I wanted to get your thoughts with the disclaimer that I know you're not diagnosing me. I not with just like being grabbed from like behind, but loud noises, like dogs suddenly bark, and all of that makes me like this. And like I get startled very easily. And if I get heavily startled, it could take me 20 minutes to calm down. Like I'm just sitting there like in this fight or flight response. Like fireworks are just horrible for me. They've gotten better as the years have gone on. Are those symptoms of PTSD?
They could be.
If so, like, how do you work on best treating those? Or is there a way to treat them without medication?
Yes, there is. There is desensitization therapies that you could go through. These are things, though, that you would definitely want to be able to sit down and talk to a psychiatrist or slash psychologist to be able to get that integrated approach. But I would definitely, given what you were describing, would advise you to possibly, go see one and see what they have to say.
Yeah, I agree.
And real quick to address you, Frank, if Ethan could give me the finger for a second, I would highly be pleased. I do normally have that type of sense of humor. I just don't think I'm going to use that on this particular show. So I'm sorry, I will not flick you off on camera.
So I'm under the impression I've basically been fascinated by mental health since I've discovered the internet. And I mean, before MySpace, I was taking those quizzes, trying to figure out what my personality type is, those personality tests and all that. And I was just obsessed with trying to figure out who I am and diagnosing myself with something because I knew that I was different and I wanted to figure out how. And so I've spent a lot of time doing research. Now, it seems to me that there are 5 diagnoses that seem very different that have like almost matching symptoms, like ADHD, autism, PTSD, bipolar, and schizophrenia. And so basically with those 5 diagnoses, if you look at all of the symptoms of them, you can have these 2 or these 3 and just have different symptoms.
Yeah.
Right?
You always need to be careful when you're trying to. This is why doctors never self-diagnose.
Right.
This is very dangerous to do that because everyone's prone to confirmation bias, and we're all human, so we all have little quirks about us that we will all share. The thing is with a lot of those mental illnesses like schizophrenia is those small things are exacerbated to huge extents. If you deal with somebody who has actual legitimate diagnosed schizophrenia, you will notice that those small quirky things that maybe you might notice about yourself are huge in proportion. And schizophrenia does not mean, for instance, like multiple personality. Let's break that off the table. That is a common trope that people say. It means split from reality.
Yeah.
Jenna, there are things that I would say about someone with schizophrenia that I would really caution somebody from saying, I may have signs of schizophrenia, because that's a very big statement. And so this is why it is always important to go to a medical professional, sit down, lay it all out on the table and say, hey, and they're going to ask you those kinds of questions. Is no different than going to a cancer doctor or for whatever else. Mental health is healthcare, and this is why we don't go to we don't go online and look up WebMD and say, do I have cancer? Because the answer is obviously you do.
Have you been looking at my browser history?
Well, so the thing is that schizophrenia actually does run in my family, as does bipolar and ADHD and depression and autism, basically all of it. And so finding out that my family member who was diagnosed with schizophrenia wasn't diagnosed until in her early 30s, right? So I always really wanted to pay attention to myself so I could catch it if I did have it, right? So it just kind of got me to be very self-aware about what I'm experiencing. Go ahead.
it's funny, Jenna, because I'm adopted. And so I'm at the other end but with the same kind of attitude. So I don't know my family history. So I'm like, oh, I wonder if I have that. I wonder if my family had that. My blood relatives had that. Wow. Maybe I should look on WebMD to see if I have that.
Well, so the thing is, though, that I've been diagnosed with ADHD, and then I was diagnosed with bipolar by 2 different doctors, and both of them, they were like, kind of, maybe, yeah. And then, so it's like I've been diagnosed with all these different things, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that all of these doctors are asking me how I'm feeling, and I'm telling them how I'm feeling. So go ahead, please.
I do also want to make sure I point out there are 2 types of bipolar disorder. There's
Yes.
type 1 and type 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is not uncommon for people to have type 2. What is more uncommon is type 1. And type 1 is your more very severe type of bipolar disorder. You will see those kinds of individuals. They tend to have a lot more struggles. You will have your mania, your hypomania, your depressive states with your type 1 and type 2. Type 2, though, is instead of going like this, you're more, but it's not unusual for people to have comorbidity with other kinds of mental illness. I mean, that everybody is a bag of granola. It's just, you never know what you have in there.
Right.
So as I said, it's just always going back to what I said. You always got to be careful. It's like going on WebMD and asking, do I have cancer? Because the answer is, of course I do. So you want to be able to see, your primary care provider or your primary mental health care provider, and discuss these things. That way they could come up with an integrated treatment plan that would best suit your needs. And what helps the healthcare provider, the mental health care provider, is when you write everything down and you're just like, hey, here's this list. Can you please look over this list? These are things that I notice about myself, but also don't just write, also write how often you notice it. Because that is a big part. People forget. They'll say like, "Oh, I've done X." Well, okay, so everyone's done X. How often have you done X? Or how many times a day have you done X, or hours, or whatever? Yeah. Those are those kinds of important things that those mental health care providers will need to be able to help give you the best advice and help that you could possibly get, so you could be a happier, healthier person.
Can we always assume that a mental health professional is qualified to diagnose with whatever it is that you have? Just because my last therapist that I saw is actually the therapist that I trust most out of the therapists that I've seen. And she's the one who told me, I actually can't diagnose you with that because I'm not trained in it.
Yeah, that is true. It's no different than going to an ENT to discuss your podiatry problems. Yeah, they've both been to med school. But, someone's going to be a specialist in one thing and another person. I work with people who have schizophrenia typically.
So typically you're going to have to go and seek out a specialist doctor to get a diagnosis on a mental health.
Or even a better diagnosis. So that's more specific.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah.
What I found useful as against to trying to manage my symptoms online or trying to find out, whether or not I have stage 10 diabetic cancer, is how to be well, how to be healthier mentally and physically. And that has helped control my behavior about focusing on negative, on what I am sick about. It isn't a panacea, it's not a magic bullet, but at 1:00 in the morning on a Saturday, it's like, well, maybe I should think about, is there something that I can do that will help me be a little bit more psychologically resilient about something that can help me be healthier.
I like that.
Real quick, we're going to jet out of here in a moment. But before we do, I would just like to take a 1 minute long commercial break and show you the video for the Recovering from Religion fundraiser we are putting together, which is on February 4th from 7 to 10 p.m. And we have got a shit ton of people involved. And here's a sneak preview. And that is an exciting group of people. As you can see, we've got over 30 atheist YouTubers involved. I just put the link. So if you want to set a reminder, a link to the video is in the comment section right now. Click it and click set reminder. And yes, you know, I can't believe I forgot to do this. I should have put Band-Aid in the video. How did I drop the ball on that one? So yes, Band-Aid will definitely be making an appearance because, as you know, my cat is a huge supporter of recovering from religion and the Secular Therapy Project.
I was actually surprised with how many people I knew on that video, on that commercial. I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's going to be a big event. But so we got to wrap this up in a moment. Daniel, where can everyone check you out at? Do you have anything going on?
Well, right now you can always check me out on Atheists Against Pseudoscientific Nonsense, the Facebook page, website, scientificatheist.com. We're always posting fun little things. You could, if you're going to look me up on Facebook, on my personal Facebook page, you're going to find dog pictures. So I'm just going to let you know. That's about what you're going to find. I've kind of just toned it down. So if you want to see the stuff that I'm really up to, go look at the Facebook pages that I run. And that's where you'll be able to see my quirky stuff. Otherwise, if you friend request me, fine, by all means, but you're not going to see much.
Actually, Frank asked in the comment section if we would accept friend requests. I can't speak for Jenna, Andy, or Daniel. I have personally had to slow down. I was like accepting them all, but I have in the past like month gotten hit with a flood. And I'm going to be maxing out shortly if I just keep accepting them all. So you can friend request me. I just can't promise that I will accept it at this time. Andy, where can everyone check you out at?
I run a blog on Pathos on the non-religious channel, Laughing in Disbelief. I do funny things there. I run a YouTube channel called Laughing in Disbelief too, with the same name. I do some comedy there. I also run a show called The Best Advice Ever, where great people come on and talk about the best advice they ever got. It's atheism, secular news, best advice. I run a morning show, 9 a.m. Monday through Friday. We have a lot of fun. So please come on over.
By the way, watch a stand-up routine. It is hilarious.
Thank you.
No.
I've been meaning to check that out. I consider myself, while not a comedian, a fairly humorous individual. Jenna and I did a show on mental health and humor, and I found that I can go into great detail on humor, pranks, the psychology behind them, and how humor works in many ways. Yep. So I was quite happy with myself. I didn't realize I knew so much about being an idiot.
Very good.
Jenna, what do you have going on?
For right now, I've got my Genesis morning meditation every weekday morning at 10 a.m. Central, where I live stream for 15 minutes. One, to kind of show you how I meditate in case you're curious, one way to do it. Two, to kind of help build a routine if you're trying to have somebody help keep you accountable to build a routine each day. I've got Atheist Aces premiered every Wednesday at 4 p.m., but released a day early to Patreon for those who can toss a couple bucks a month this way. And then I've got Carrot Noises, where I live stream and paint on Fridays at 3:30 for 2 hours. So I can kind of chat with you and paint, and that's always fun. Sometimes I'll crochet, but it's usually painting. And then next week, after you come back for the Ethan and Jenna Show, I will be back on AXP, and this time with Shannon Q. So that should be fun.
Ooh, that'll be definitely a good show to check out. So every Sunday, I have the show with Jenna Belk. Every Tuesday on my other channel, youtube.com/YFAnatheist, we tackle supernatural claims, belief in aliens, and conspiracy theories. So we get some of the wildest calls. This last time we had a psychic. We had someone who thinks that the Illuminati and the Democratic Party are responsible for COVID or creating COVID. Like, we get some interesting callers, but we focus on friendly discourse and positive skepticism. And then every Thursday, if you're looking for kind of a break from regular atheist content, Hannah Vaughn and I host a show on dating, relationships, and sex. This last Thursday, we covered ADHD and relationships, and we covered also ADHD and sex, because believe it or not, ADHD can be very impacting to your sexual, what would be the word? To sex in general. It can affect you. So Anyways, thank you everyone for checking us out and sitting with us through this great podcast. We're here every Sunday. I also want to thank our top tier patrons, although I friggin' closed the damn thing. So give me 1 second. Thank you to our top tier patrons, Kenneth, Leonard, Expresso Cat, and Doanya. If you are interested in becoming a Patreon, you can sign up. The link's in the description for as little as $1 a month. Helps us improve the show, and we will be using the funds to also give back to the community and help other organizations. So everyone, remember to like and subscribe. Daniel, Andy, thank you so much for sitting down with us and answering some of these questions and talking about this important topic. I hope everyone has a safe and wonderful week.
Thanks so much.